Hey, everybody. It's time for Kabuki. It's one of everybody's favorites, usually. It's exciting. So this is our third Japanese form. We had No, and then the Kyogen clown plays that also happen in No, which I didn't talk about too much, but I want to mention them. Bunraku, the puppet theater, and then Kabuki. So you'll see some similarities, but also some differences, as one expects. So the legend is that Kabuki was created by a woman who was a priestess or dancing priestess. And so the legend is that it was created, and I guess probably regardless of the legend, it was created sort of at the end of the 16th century, which is a little later or around the same time as Bunraku. So, and also again, at the same time as when a lot of countries in Europe were having their Renaissance. So this woman, Okuni, is credited with creating Kabuki, and this is a picture of her. And of course, we don't know whether this is true or not, but what is interesting about it is the ever fluctuating relationship that Kabuki has had with female performers and the feminine form. More on that later. So there were early touring groups of Kabuki. And by the time we get to 1616, which is sort of a magical date in history, it also happens to be when Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote, it's when he died. It also happens to be when Shakespeare died. They died on the same day, coincidentally. By 1616, there are 7 licensed Kabuki theaters in Kyoto. So for there to be licensed theaters providing Kabuki entertainment means that it took off like gangbusters. Within 30 years or so of it being created, it became pretty dang popular. So what we have here is an image of an early Kabuki theater. It's definitely theater for the masses, although that's kind of the wrong way to say it. It's very popular. No theater, the theater spaces are smaller, they hold fewer audience members, and it kind of has that mystical religious quality. It's not rabble rousing or anything like that. Bunraku kind of lives in the middle of those things. Kabuki is really much more popular, bigger emphasis on plot and action. It's much more exciting. And you can see from this picture how this is a representation of how many people are enjoying a Kabuki performance. So at the stage is way down there at the end. This is I'm pretty sure it's the Hanamichi. I think I'm getting that right. That's the pathway that comes out. It's like a catwalk, comes out through the audience. And in some Kabuki performances now, you'll see a couple of them coming out. Tons of people watching. The bald heads would be male, not obviously, but that is sort of a fashion statement. But then this looks like a female head down here, same here. I don't know whether the women are separated from the men in this image. I also don't know what date this image comes from, but I'm pretty sure it's fairly early. But anyway, you can see there's a lot of, it's a popular place to be. So here's to follow up on this gender thing. Shogun culture is culture that is essentially kind of feudal. So shoguns are kind of like the leaders of, it's not a manor, but like what would be a lord in Europe in the feudal system are the shoguns in Japan. essentially. They're the people who make the rules. They're the people who kind of run everything. So by 1629, which is, according to legend, less than 50 years from the time that supposedly a woman created Kabuki, so in less than 50 years, females get forbidden to be on stage. You can make of that what you will. And then young boys start to play their roles. You know, if you want to do a little digging around to read up more on that, I think it's a great thing to kind of look into. I assume that it's not a complete assumption, but based on what I have read, it seems that there is again a sexual discomfort with women on stage. Off the record, I don't know whether, can we connect that to sort of the policing of women's clothing? Even now in schools, girls can't wear spaghetti straps because boys can't control themselves. Is that what's going on? Don't know. Maybe. There certainly seems to be a hypersexual awareness about what might be happening in a kabuki theater. So so then 20, 30 years later, there was concern about the young boys playing the roles because apparently the attraction to these female characters was enough that they were still attracted, and now they're attracted to young boys. And so there seems to have been a problem amongst the shoguns with that. And so men started to play the female roles. And then so there's a very long tradition until the 20th century. There's a long, long, long tradition of men playing female roles. So in the last 50 years, there's been a kind of pushback about that. You have seen more women working in kabuki. But what's interesting is, like in 1983, this all-female kabuki troupe was formed. Because the role of the female, I will show you the names for the roles in a second, because the name for that female role became almost fetishized, right? It became like, this is the essence of femininity. This is perfection in femininity. And it is such that only a man can play it. Now, if you want to riff on drag culture and that kind of conversation, you totally can, because I think it's a totally valuable riff. But it became so fetishized that women couldn't live up to the role, which really kind of sets up a situation where you have to create an all-female company, because if a woman were just to join a regular company and then play the female roles, everybody would say, well, she's not as good as the man that was playing it. Does that make sense? It's actually, there is a parallel, and I hope that it's okay to make this parallel because it springs to mind. I've never really made it before. There is a kind of interesting parallel to the American tradition of minstrel shows, which started off, which white people putting on blackface and playing Black performers made audiences think this is what we expect of Black performance. So when we go to see Black performers, we need them to live up to this thing that the minstrel shows have done. So there's a whole history, which you probably know something about. There's a whole history of Black American performers having to make themselves more dark-skinned in order to please white audiences. Can you see the connection? I mean, I realize there's a race connection and one's a gender connection. One's a race thing, one's a gender thing. But the pressure put upon the performer and the expectations of the audience controlling what is able to be performed is similar. So here's another illustration of the kabuki stage. And here you can see this is this pathway, and then there's another one that's coming out, two of them it looks like, coming out across here. And You can see this here. That is a special spot. That's usually an elevated, like an elevator, a lift that works there. There's also an elevator at the front here. I'll show you a diagram, which is a little easier to see, but you have the sense of it there. So this is the audience down on the lower end, and here is the stage. So up here on the stage, we have a revolve. The Japanese invented the stage revolve, and it was first used in Kabuki because scene changes and in particular fast scene changes, fast costume changes, anything that can sort of dazzle and impress is a very important part of Kabuki. So they invented the revolve for quick scene changes. And they even used revolves with like an elevator or a lift inside of it, which I'd love to see how that works exactly. But the National Theatre in London has what they call a drum revolve, which if you've watched any of, go and watch, no, you probably can't anymore. If you saw the Frankenstein with Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller, there was a really good shot of the way that the drum revolve works. They are able, it goes down really pretty deep, a couple of school buses deep, and it can turn, and it turns and lifts at the same time, but it doesn't all have to go at the same time. Different pieces can go, so it can sort of spiral up. The Radio City Music Hall has a stage that does all kinds of things. Anyway, Kabuki was really the first place to start to do that kind of cool stuff. Then we have this lift right here, which is frequently used to pop actors up, or it could be set pieces, but to pop them up as a like surprise, and it's right there down center. This over here is where you would have your musicians. There's a lot of there's kind of constant scoring happening in most Kabuki, even if it's drums or something like that. There's a lot of instrumental underscoring. So they're in a pretty prominent spot. There is a narrator over here. You know what? If you were going to set up a stage, you probably stick a narrator down right or down left. Like no matter what you were going to do, probably that makes sense that the narrator is over here. And then we have this flower path, the Hanamichi, which is this gangway that comes from the waiting room or the green room, kind of essentially. And another lift here, which is very frequently used for not heroes, the monsters or the villains, or it's because it's sort of out in the audience. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about it, that is usually used for the thing that makes you go in the audience. And then this is sort of an optional extra flower path that you might have. So if anybody's ever taken any kind of martial art and you've learned katas, there are these set movement patterns like choreography, except they're filled with energy. And they're not dance, but they are these full body movement patterns. Those are used throughout Kabuki, so certain characters move in certain ways that reflects their energy. Everything actually about the way a Kabuki character moves or is made up or is costumed says everything that an audience member would need to know about the character. What they actually say and do kind of just goes in line with that. But I think this is one of the places where like the similarity to puppetry comes up, because when you see the character, you get it immediately. The Onagata is the female character. So those are the ones that became these fetishized super feminine figures. Then there's a number of different male roles. The one that is, I'd say the two that are the most well-known are the Aragata, which means rough style. And they are usually kind of superheroes. If you're telling these legends and stories where magical things happen. You know, Aragata is, you know, Thor. He's Superman. He's the Japanese version of a kind of a superhero. And they're the ones who you see with the red um, lines on their face, which are actually supposed to represent veins, and that is supposed to represent their strength and their ferocity. So they have that very specific makeup. And they do the cross-eyed thing a lot. They hit these poses. It's they also remind me a lot when I watch. Well, I don't watch it very often, but when I watch ever like World Wrestling Federation type stuff, and you know they get up and they're like, oh, you know, to the audience. That's very much like these Aragata Kabuki characters. They turn to the audience, they pose for the audience, they do something and they hit a pose and they cross their eyes and they kind of like punch it. They give it a button when they hit the end of it and the audience goes crazy. I got some links for videos so you can see that happening. I'm not making it up. So that's that guy. And then there's the more ingenue kind of character, the people who fall in love, who are displaced by their families because they've done something wrong and need to kind of be, whether it's rescued or get their lives back together. They're really sort of figures. What I would say is they're figures that for us would go into a rom-com. And then the Aragata are people that would go into a Marvel series or something like that. And you can have both of those things in a show. So a little more on the gata. Well, obviously you can see from the picture, it's a very specific look. You know, it's all the expectations of femininity. The way one moves, the way one speaks, everything about the comportment is super restricted. That's what I will say about that, the essence of femininity. Here's a really crappy picture of an Aragata, the makeup. You can see this is what I'm talking about with these red lines. I'm not sure if anybody, it's totally, you know, Chinese, a different culture, but I don't know if anybody had the opportunity to go around and look at all the masks that the Chinese opera people brought last semester. I don't even remember when that was. I think it was last semester, in the fall. All of the face paint on the masks has an incredibly specific meaning, and that is true also for here. And it's a connection to character. How do I know it's this character? Because not just that he's an Aragata and he has the red makeup, but it is a particular way that the makeup is done. And you know, our lens, we don't have that ability to recognize things like that. But again, I would sort of point you to the Marvel universe, and the way you know who people are, because you know that they are those people, those characters. This is a better picture. I think I'll let somebody else explore the meaning of the makeup, because it looks to me like the bluish grayish color that's on top of his head almost looks like it's supposed to represent a tonsure, that this has been shaved, and like all of the balding men in the picture of the Kabuki theater, it looks like it represents a particular hairstyle to me. Lots of very strong legs needed for this stuff. The use of legs, the use of stomping, which has actually become an entire Suzuki method of training actors, which kind of is related to Kabuki, but it is being used by lots of different actors. It's all about the way one stomps, and you have to have very strong thighs. So everything's exaggerated and big with these characters. So I am going to shut up now and point you in the direction of the videos that I have linked. There's a really cool documentary about Enosuke III, who is and it was made like in the 80s, I think. And he was a really up and coming rising superstar of Kabuki theater. And it kind of follows him around backstage while he's doing a famous Kabuki piece that hadn't been done in very many years because it requires one actor to play 10 or 11 roles, and with costume and makeup changes and all of that. So it follows him around, and you kind of get a really good sense of how athletic it is, as well as artistic. And then I think there's one other, at the crash course on Kabuki, because although I may say some of the same things there, I think it's an overlap, but it's not exactly the same. So there's probably some cool, there's cool images and cool things that he has to share with you also. So there you go. That is Kabuki.